Night of the Hunter was Lawton's first and only film. Dr. Jekyll, to give it its correct pronunciation, and Mr. Hyde was Reuben Mamoulian's third, though many more, up to Silk Stockings of 1957, were to follow. Mamoulian, too, had come from the theatre. Born in Russia, he was a graduate of Stanislavski's second studio. Then he came to England, where he directed in the theatre for some while before going to America. There he directed, amongst other things, the premiere of Porgy. Then, in 1929, he directed his first film, Applause. From the very beginning, he exploited the possibilities of film as opposed to stage. No more than Lawton did he attempt to make filmed plays. In fact, his work is notable for its innovations, and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is no exception. Stevenson's novella of the scientist who experiments on himself to release a terrifying alter ego has disturbed from its first appearance, and it was one of the first stories that cinema told. There is a version from 1908, succeeded by British, German, Danish, and American versions during the next 20 years. John Barrymore made one in 1921, and Conrad Veidt for Murnau in 1920. There have been many subsequent versions up to the present day, musical, comical, cartoonic. Abbott and Costello met Dr. Jekyll. Dr. Jekyll signed a daughter in 1957 and a son in 1951, and Sylvester the Cat played the role. But despite Spencer Tracy's brilliant performance of 1941, Mamoulian's 1932 version is the one that most people remember. It's an exceptionally imaginative treatment and filmically audacious. Frederick March, as the heroes both, gives a fine performance, or two fine performances. What makes it so compelling, though, is the sexual intensity that Mamoulian achieves throughout. It's not a horror story, as he tells it. It deals with the human condition in psychosexual terms. To a striking degree, this is also interestingly true of Night of the Hunter, the sex in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is real. Appetites and their frustration are vividly portrayed on the screen, and the subject of the film becomes, not as it might have been, science and its terrible power, but repression and its dire consequences. The camera work and the art direction sustain this at every level. The opening sequence, famous in its time, shows the action entirely from Dr. Jekyll's point of view. We briefly catch sight of him when he catches sight of himself in the mirror, but the device gives us a strong sense of his almost unnaturally exhilarated state, dreamy but excited. The sensuality of the film is exceptional. One can feel the damp and the fog of the London streets. Carl Struss, the director of photography, was something of a master at dank evocation. He was responsible a few years later for The Island of Dr. Moreau, another variation on the scientist who releases the beast in himself. The encounter of Jekyll with Miriam Hopkins, the prostitute whom he helps after she's been beaten up, is voluptuous on both sides, a willing flirtation. March gives full measure to Jekyll's frustration when he discovers that he has to wait another 3 years before he can marry his fiancée. We're constantly aware of sexual energy bubbling underneath the surface. And the transformations of Jekyll into Hyde, at first cunningly off-screen, then by a technique still not divulged, in full view of the camera, exciting in themselves, as exciting as anything in Altered States or An American Werewolf in London. But they're above all extraordinary for their sense of liberation. Free, free, cries Hyde, as filled with violent energy and laughing, almost hugging himself, he celebrates his existence. And it's as if it were the actor speaking rather than the character. March, admirable if limited in his incarnation as Jekyll, becomes possessed. His body bent in an animal state of alertness, his eyes burning with appetite. Conventionally hideous though he is, hairy and simian, dirty and rough, there's something undeniably attractive about him, so vital and eager he is. As he holds his head up to feel the rain on his face, one cannot fail to be as exhilarated as he is. Hyde is, of course, the id incarnate, an anarchic, destructive spirit that, terrible though it is entirely human. When he dies, it's not a triumphant moment, rather a tragic one. So here again, the moral framework is far from simple. Mamoulian went on to make many distinguished films, among them Queen Christina, Becky Sharp, the first film in Technicolor, and Summer Holiday. His career seemed to peter out somewhat after that. In a famous phrase, Andrew Sarris described him as an innovator who ran out of innovations. Whatever the truth of that, it's clear that in Dr. Jekyll, the innovations, indeed the whole expressive gesture of the film, are not there for their own sakes, but arise out of the material in question. It remains a disturbing and poetic film, no mere technician's night out.